The Montana winter of 1978 brought the most ruthless blizzard the Blackfoot Valley had witnessed in a century. Temperatures plunged to 30 below as savage winds drove snow in blinding sheets across the foothills. It was in these unforgiving conditions that Rebecca Sullivan found herself alone in a remote cabin, her husband 4 days in the ground, with a 5-year-old daughter and infant son who depended entirely on her for survival, their supplies dwindling and hope fading with each passing hour. Rebecca had resigned herself to the grim fate that seemed inevitable until a shadow appeared at her door. A half-Comanche doctor named Lucas Blackwood, stranded when his vehicle slid off the rural highway, would discover not only a family on the brink of tragedy, but also an extraordinary gift in Rebecca that would transform countless lives in the valley, if only they could survive the night. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Sullivan stared through the frost-covered window of the small cabin, watching as the relentless snow continued to fall. Just 3 weeks earlier, her life had held such promise. She and her husband Daniel had moved from Pittsburgh to the Montana countryside, with dreams of raising their children in the clean mountain air, while Daniel worked as a wildlife biologist for the State Conservation Department. The rustic property they'd purchased sat in a picturesque valley with spectacular views, and Daniel had spent the autumn reinforcing the old cabin to withstand the harsh Montana winter. The nearest town, Pine Tree, was a 40-minute drive in good conditions, a fact that had seemed charming during their summer visits and now loomed as a potential death sentence. Daniel had never lived to see winter fully arrive. 3 days after a routine checkup in town, he had collapsed while chopping firewood, an aneurysm taking his life in seconds. Rebecca, still recovering from giving birth to their son Michael just 6 weeks earlier, had found him face down in the snow. By some miracle, she had managed to get his body into their truck and drive the treacherous road to Pine Tree, their 5-year-old daughter Lily confused and frightened in the back seat. The small-town funeral had been a blur, faces of strangers offering condolences to a woman they barely knew. Sheriff Collins had arranged for Daniel to be buried in the town cemetery just as the first flurries began, a storm system that meteorologists were now calling the worst in decades. Rebecca had insisted on returning to the cabin afterward, ignoring the concerned looks from townspeople who suggested she stay until the weather cleared. "We'll be fine," she had told them with a confidence she didn't feel. "We have plenty of supplies." It was only partially a lie. They had enough food for perhaps 2 weeks if she rationed carefully. The generator had fuel for maybe 5 days of intermittent use. The firewood, thankfully, was well stocked, the last gift from her husband. Now, 4 days after the funeral, the storm had intensified beyond anything the forecasters had predicted. The power lines had gone down the previous evening, leaving the generator as their only source of electricity. Cell service, spotty at best in the valley, had disappeared completely. The satellite phone Daniel used for his work had died when Rebecca couldn't find the backup battery pack. "Mommy?" Lily's small voice pulled Rebecca from her dark thoughts. "I'm hungry." Rebecca forced a smile, turning away from the window. "I know, sweetheart. Let's find something good for lunch, okay?" Lily nodded, her thin face solemn beneath a mop of unruly brown curls. She had her father's eyes, deep blue and thoughtful. Rebecca had caught her daughter staring at Daniel's empty chair during breakfast, but the child had asked no questions. At 5, Lily seemed to understand more than Rebecca could explain. "Can we have the dinosaur soup?" Lily asked, referring to the canned pasta shapes she loved. Rebecca hesitated. The dinosaur soup was one of their few ready-to-eat meals that didn't require cooking. She had been saving it for an emergency. Then again, what was this if not an emergency? "Sure, baby. Dinosaur soup sounds perfect." As Rebecca moved to the small kitchen area, baby Michael began to fuss in his makeshift bassinet. a drawer padded with blankets that sat on the kitchen table. Daniel had planned to build a proper crib, but time had run out. Rebecca lifted her son, cradling him against her shoulder as she opened the cupboard with her free hand. 8 cans of food remained, including the dinosaur soup. Some pasta, a half-empty bag of rice, a few potatoes, sprouting eyes, and 3 onions completed their non-perishable food supply. The refrigerator held milk that would spoil when the generator died, some eggs, butter, and a package of bacon Rebecca had been saving. Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, rattling the windows in their frames. Rebecca tried not to think about the temperature forecast she'd heard before losing radio contact, 30 below, with the wind chill possibly dropping further. "Lily, can you be my special helper and get the blanket from your bed? The thick one Grandma made?" Lily nodded and scampered off to the cabin's single bedroom. Rebecca had been sleeping on the sofa since Daniel died, unable to face the empty side of their bed. As Lily returned, dragging the heavy patchwork quilt, Rebecca felt a wave of bone-deep exhaustion. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since Daniel's death, constantly waking to check on Michael or to add wood to the stove. Her milk supply was diminishing, likely from stress and poor nutrition, making Michael increasingly fussy during feedings. "Are we going to build a blanket fort?" Lily asked, her face brightening slightly. "That's a wonderful idea," Rebecca replied. Grateful for her daughter's resilience, "We'll make one big enough for all 3 of us." They spent the next hour arranging blankets and pillows in front of the wood stove, creating a small world where the harsh reality outside couldn't reach them. Rebecca heated the dinosaur soup on the wood stove, pouring it into a bowl for Lily, while she nursed Michael. The baby latched poorly, fussing and pulling away repeatedly. "Is baby brother sick?" Lily asked, watching with concern. "No, sweetie, he's just hungry, and Mommy's having trouble making enough milk." Rebecca stroked Michael's downy head, willing her body to provide what he needed. After lunch, Rebecca checked their firewood supply. The indoor stack would last perhaps 3 days if she was careful. More wood was stacked against the exterior wall of the cabin, but accessing it meant braving the blizzard. She would wait until absolutely necessary. As afternoon faded toward evening, the temperature inside the cabin began to drop. Rebecca added more wood to the stove and wrapped the children in extra layers. She needed to conserve fuel for the generator, using it only a few hours each day to maintain some heat from the electric baseboards. The wood stove alone couldn't heat the entire cabin efficiently. While Lily napped in their blanket fort, Rebecca wrote in the journal she'd kept since moving to Montana. The familiar routine brought a small measure of comfort. December 14th, 2008. The storm shows no sign of weakening. I tried the satellite phone again, but the battery is completely dead. Daniel always kept the spare battery in his pack, but I've turned the cabin upside down and can't find it. The regular phone is useless without power to the lines. Our food will last maybe 10 days if I eat very little. The formula samples the pediatrician gave us are gone. Michael is struggling with my diminished milk supply. If I can't feed him properly..." Rebecca stopped writing, unwilling to complete the thought. She turned to a fresh page and began listing their remaining supplies, searching for options she might have overlooked. Outside, darkness fell early, as it did in the Montana winter. The wind increased in intensity, howling around the cabin's eaves like a living thing seeking entry. Rebecca added more wood to the stove and turned on the generator long enough to heat bottles of water that she tucked into the blankets around the children. By 9 o'clock, both children were asleep in the blanket fort, and Rebecca allowed herself to collapse onto the sofa. Her head throbbed with tension and hunger. She had eaten only a few spoonfuls of Lily's soup, saving the rest for her daughter's breakfast. Sleep pulled at her, but she fought it, afraid of missing Michael's hungry cries or letting the fire die down too far. A sudden, sharp crack jolted her upright. For a moment, she thought a tree had fallen against the cabin. Then came another crack, followed by an ominous groaning sound from overhead. Rebecca looked up in horror as a thin fissure appeared in the ceiling, stretching from the chimney toward the far wall. As she watched, a trickle of snow powder sifted through the crack. "No, no, no," she whispered, rising to her feet. The weight of accumulated snow was stressing the roof Daniel had promised to reinforce with additional supports, but hadn't completed before his death. Rebecca grabbed a broom and tried to push against the ceiling, but the crack widened slightly with an audible groan. She needed to clear the roof, but climbing up there in the dark during a blizzard would be suicide. Until morning, all she could do was monitor the situation and hope the structure held. Rebecca spent a sleepless night watching the crack, adding wood to the stove, and nursing Michael with diminishing success. By dawn, the fissure had stabilized, but still threatened to worsen. With any additional snow load, the storm continued unabated, dumping another 8 inches overnight. After feeding Lily the remains of yesterday's soup and attempting to nurse Michael, Rebecca made a decision. She had to try to clear at least part of the roof before it collapsed on them. "Lily, I need to go outside for a little while to fix something," she explained, pulling on Daniel's heavy winter coat and boots. "You're in charge of watching Michael. Stay by the stove where it's warm, and don't open the door for anyone but me." Lily's eyes widened with fear. "Don't go outside, Mommy. Daddy went outside and didn't come back." The words pierced Rebecca's heart. "Oh, sweetie, this is different. I'm just going to clean the snow off our roof so it doesn't break. I'll be right outside the whole time, and you'll be able to hear me." After several more minutes of reassurance, Rebecca stepped out into the storm, the wind instantly stealing her breath. The temperature was brutal, the air so cold it hurt to inhale. Snow swirled around her in disorienting patterns as she trudged to the shed where Daniel kept his tools. The roof rake, a long-handled tool designed for pulling snow from overhead, was hanging on the wall. Rebecca grabbed it with numbed fingers and made her way back to the cabin. The wind worked against her as she extended the rake upward, trying to catch the edge of the snow blanket covering the roof. For nearly an hour, she struggled to clear even a small section, her strength fading as the cold penetrated her layers. The physical exertion after days of minimal food left her lightheaded. When she finally managed to pull a significant amount of snow from above the weakened area, her relief was short-lived. A sudden gust knocked her off balance. Rebecca stumbled backward, her boot catching on a hidden branch beneath the snow. She fell hard, the back of her head striking something solid beneath the powder. Pain exploded behind her eyes, and for several seconds the world went grey. When her vision cleared, Rebecca found herself lying in snow nearly 2 feet deep. The cold had already begun to seep through her clothes. With enormous effort, she pushed herself up, fighting waves of nausea and dizziness. Her gloved hand came away from her head, stained with blood. Somehow, she staggered back to the cabin door, the roof rake forgotten in the snow. Inside, Lily's face crumpled at the sight of her mother. "You're hurt," she whimpered. "It's just a little cut," Rebecca lied, dropping onto the sofa as the room spun around her. "Mommy needs to rest for a minute." The next few hours passed in a haze of pain and encroaching despair. Rebecca drifted in and out of consciousness, rousing herself when Michael cried or when Lily shook her with increasing desperation. She knew she had a concussion, possibly a serious one, but there was nothing to be done, no way to call for help, no way to reach town. By late afternoon, Rebecca's condition had deteriorated. She could barely stand without vomiting, and her vision occasionally doubled. The children were hungry, Michael frantically so, and the fire was burning low. With trembling hands, she tried to spoon-feed the baby some water mixed with the last of the powdered milk they had for coffee. He refused it, screaming with hunger. Lily had retreated to the blanket fort, emerging occasionally to add wood to the stove, as Rebecca had taught her. "Mommy, please don't be sick," she pleaded, her small face tight with fear. "I'm trying, baby," Rebecca whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. The awful truth was settling over her. Without help, her children would die here. She couldn't feed them. Soon she wouldn't be able to keep them warm. The satellite phone remained stubbornly dead, and the storm showing no signs of relenting. As darkness fell again, Rebecca gathered her remaining strength and pulled her children into the blanket fort with her. If these were to be their final hours, they would spend them together, holding each other against the encroaching cold. "I'm going to tell you a story about when your daddy and I first met," she said, her voice faint as Michael fussed weakly against her chest, and Lily curled against her side outside. The wind shrieked around the cabin's corners, drowning out the sound of an engine struggling through the deep snow on the narrow access road. Rebecca didn't hear the vehicle door slam or the footsteps crunching toward the cabin. She was floating, in a place between consciousness and oblivion, murmuring a story about college days to her children. She didn't register the knock at first. When it came again, louder and more insistent, Lily scrambled from the fort. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Lily, no!" Rebecca called, trying to rise and failing as nausea overwhelmed her. "Someone's here, Mommy. Help is here!" Lily cried, running to the door. "Don't open it," Rebecca pleaded, but her voice was too weak to carry. Through double vision, she watched in horror as her 5-year-old struggled with the door latch, finally pulling it open to reveal a tall figure silhouetted against the snow-filled darkness. A man stepped inside, bringing a blast of frigid air and swirling snowflakes. "Hello?" he called, his voice deep and wary. "I saw smoke from your chimney. My truck slid off the road about a mile back and He stopped abruptly as his eyes adjusted to the dim interior, and he took in the scene. A small girl in rumpled clothes, a makeshift fort near a dying fire, and a woman struggling to rise, blood matted in her hair, an infant clutched to her chest. "Jesus!" he breathed, quickly closing the door behind him and dropping a medical bag on the floor. "You're hurt." The man shrugged off a snow-covered parka, revealing broad shoulders and copper skin. His black hair was pulled back in a short ponytail, and his dark eyes moved with professional assessment from Rebecca to the children. "I'm Dr. Lucas Blackwood," he said, his tone shifting to something calm and authoritative. "And it looks like you folks need help." Rebecca tried to focus on the stranger's face, but darkness was closing in from the edges of her vision. The last thing she registered before consciousness slipped away was the gentle strength of his hands as he took Michael from her arms, and the strange sense that, against all probability, help had arrived in the form of a half-frozen doctor stranded in the same storm that had nearly killed them. Lucas Blackwood hadn't planned on being stranded in the Montana wilderness during the worst blizzard in decades. Just 4 hours earlier, he had been at St. Matthew's Hospital in Helena, finishing his shift in the emergency department. The director's request had seemed simple enough: deliver critical medications to the clinic in Pine Tree, where supplies were dangerously low. "You grew up in these mountains, Lucas," Dr. Abernathy had said. "If anyone can make the drive safely, it's you." That vote of confidence now seemed like cosmic irony as Lucas assessed the dire situation before him. The woman, Rebecca, according to the 5-year-old girl who'd introduced herself as Lily, had passed out cold. Her pupils were uneven when Lucas checked them with the penlight from his medical bag, a clear sign of the concussion he'd already suspected from the blood in her hair and her disoriented state. The infant boy, Michael, Lily had informed him, solemnly, was severely dehydrated and showing early signs of hypothermia. His cries were weak, his skin cool to the touch, his fontanelle noticeably sunken. Lucas worked methodically, the way he'd been trained. First priorities: warmth and medical assessment. He stoked the dying fire, adding the last pieces of indoor firewood until the stove glowed with renewed heat. Then he moved Rebecca to the couch, elevating her head slightly and covering her with a thick quilt. "Lily, I need your help," he said, keeping his voice calm for the frightened child. "Can you show me where your mom keeps clean towels and any first aid supplies?" The little girl nodded, seemingly relieved to have an adult taking charge. She led him to a small bathroom where Lucas found a basic first aid kit. Not much, but better than nothing. "Good job," he told her. "Now, is there any infant formula for your brother?" Lily's face fell. "It's all gone. Mommy tried to feed him, but her milk doesn't work right anymore." Lucas understood the situation immediately. The stress, likely combined with poor nutrition, had compromised the mother's milk supply. The baby was starving. "Okay, let me check what I have." Lucas returned, drew his medical bag and rifled through its contents. The medication delivery to Pine Tree had been his official mission, but his years working on reservations and in underserved areas had taught him to travel prepared. From the depths of his bag, he pulled out 2 small, ready-to-feed formula bottles, samples he kept for emergencies. They wouldn't last long, but they might buy the infant some crucial hours. Lucas warmed 1 bottle using body heat, then gathered Michael into his arms. The baby latched onto the nipple with desperate energy, gulping the formula. Slowly, little. Lucas murmured, periodically pulling the bottle back to prevent the infant from choking or vomiting. As the baby fed, Lucas turned his attention to Lily. "When was the last time you ate, sweetie?" "Lunch yesterday," she replied, watching her brother with worried eyes. "We had dinosaur soup." Lucas felt a constriction in his chest. These children had been steadily starving while the storm raged. "Are there any other food supplies in the house? Mommy keeps the cans in the cabinet over there." Lily pointed to the kitchen area, "but she said we need to save them." With the baby still feeding in one arm, Lucas investigated the cabinets. The situation was worse than he'd feared. A few cans of vegetables, some pasta, rice, and not much else. At the rate the storm was intensifying, they could be stranded for days. Lucas had grown up half-Comanche on his father's side, raised between 2 worlds. His mother's white middle-class existence in Helena, and his father's more traditional life on the reservation in Oklahoma, where they spent summers. His grandfather, a tribal healer, had taught him survival skills alongside ancient medicinal knowledge, lessons that had influenced his decision to become a doctor. Those skills would be crucial now. But first, he needed to address Rebecca's head injury. After settling Michael back into his makeshift bed, Lucas gathered his medical supplies and knelt beside the unconscious woman. He cleaned the wound carefully, a nasty gash about 2 inches, long on the back of her head that would ideally need stitches. Without proper equipment, he used butterfly bandages from the first aid kit to close it as best he could. "Is my mommy going to die like Daddy did?" Lily asked suddenly, her small voice cracking. Lucas looked up, startled. "Your dad died recently?" Lily nodded, tears forming. "He fell down outside, and then Mommy drove us to town, and they put him in the ground." The pieces fell into place, a recent widow alone with 2 young children during a catastrophic storm. The tragedy of the situation struck Lucas with nearly physical force. "Your mom has a head injury, but I'm a doctor, and I'm going to take care of her," he assured Lily, his voice gentle but firm. "She needs rest and medicine, but she's strong. I can tell." As he spoke, Rebecca stirred, slightly moaning. Lucas checked her vitals again, pulse fast but steady, breathing regular. Not ideal, but not immediately life-threatening. "Lily, I need to get more firewood from outside. Will you sit with your mom while I do that? If she wakes up, tell her to stay still and that the doctor is here." The little girl nodded solemnly, climbing onto the sofa near her mother's feet. Lucas pulled on his still damp parka and headed back into the storm. The temperature had dropped further, the wind cutting through his clothing like knives. The wood pile against the cabin was nearly buried in drifting snow. Lucas dug with his hands until he uncovered several logs, stacking as many as he could. A carry in his arms. By his third trip inside with wood, his fingers were numb and his face burning from the cold. The hour outside had given him time to assess their situation more fully. His truck was hopelessly stuck a mile down the mountain, the satellite phone in his vehicle useless with a shattered screen, damaged when he'd skidded off the road. The cabin was dangerously low on supplies, with one patient suffering a concussion and another severely malnourished. And the storm, according to the last forecast he'd heard, was expected to maintain its fury for at least another 36 hours. Lucas stacked the firewood neatly by the stove and checked on Rebecca again. Her color was better, but she remained unconscious, concerning but not unusual with concussions. He prepared a small pot of rice on the wood stove, adding a can of beans for protein. "Dinner will be ready soon," he told Lily, who had barely been moved from her vigil by her mother. "Are you an Indian?" she asked suddenly, eyeing his copper skin and black hair with unfiltered childhood curiosity. "Half-Comanche on my father's side," Lucas replied, stirring the pot. "My mom is from Montana, like you." "Daddy showed me pictures of Comanche people in his books," Lily said. "He studied animals and plants and sometimes the people who lived here before." "A biologist?" Lucas asked. Lily nodded. "He was showing me how to track rabbits before he went to heaven." Lucas felt another pang at the fresh loss this family had suffered. "Your dad sounds like he was a smart man who loved you very much." "He said I was smart too. Smarter than most grown-ups." Lily's chin lifted with pride despite her exhaustion. A soft moan from the couch interrupted them. Rebecca's eyes fluttered open, disoriented and unfocused. "Lily?" she called weakly. "Michael?" Lucas moved to her side, medical training taking over. "Try not to move too quickly, Ms. Sullivan. You have a concussion." Rebecca's gaze found him, confusion and fear crossing her face. "Who?" "I'm Dr. Lucas, Blackwood. My truck went off the road during the storm. Your daughter let me in about 3 hours ago when I saw the smoke from your chimney. You were unconscious with a head injury." Rebecca struggled to sit up despite his warning. "My baby is right here and doing better," Lucas assured her, gently pressing her back down. "I had some emergency formula in my medical bag. He's rehydrating and sleeping now." Relief washed over Rebecca's pale face. "Thank God," she whispered. Then wariness returned. "You're really a doctor?" Lucas nodded. "Emergency medicine at St. Matthew's in Helena. I was delivering supplies to the clinic in Pine Tree when I got caught in the storm." He pulled his hospital ID from his pocket and held it where she could see it. Rebecca studied it. Then him, clearly processing this unexpected development through the fog of her concussion. "We were running out of everything," she finally admitted. "I tried to clear the roof, but I fell. You have a laceration on the back of your head. I've cleaned and closed it as best I could, but you'll need proper medical attention when we can get you to town." "When will that be?" she asked, her voice small. Lucas hesitated. "The storm is still intensifying. Based on the forecast, we're looking at another day or two before conditions improve enough for travel." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. "We don't have enough food for days. Michael needs formula. I can't—" "One problem at a time," Lucas interrupted, gently. "Right now, we have rice and beans cooking for dinner. I have one more bottle of formula for Michael. Tomorrow, I'll figure out our next steps." Rebecca looked like she wanted to argue, but lacked the strength. Instead, she reached for Lily, who climbed carefully onto the couch and curled against her mother's side. "Thank you," Rebecca said finally, meeting Lucas's eyes. "We would have—" She trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought in front of her daughter. Lucas nodded, understanding the unspoken reality. Without intervention, they likely wouldn't have survived another 24 hours. Over a simple dinner of rice and beans, with Rebecca managing a few spoonfuls despite her nausea, Lucas learned more about their situation. Daniel Sullivan had been a wildlife biologist for the state, specializing in predator populations. They had moved from Pittsburgh just 4 months earlier when he accepted the position. Michael had been born shortly after their arrival, earlier than expected. "Daniel loved it here," Rebecca said, her voice strengthening as she spoke of her husband. "He was so excited to raise the kids in this environment, to teach them about nature firsthand." "It must have been a difficult transition for you," Lucas observed, noting how she referred to Montana as here rather than home. Rebecca's eyes clouded. "I was doing it for him, for them." She glanced at her children. "I'm a pharmacist by training, but there weren't any positions available nearby. The plan was for me to stay home with the kids until Michael was older, then look for work in Pine Tree or commute to Helena." As she spoke, Lucas noticed something interesting. Despite her concussion and exhaustion, Rebecca spoke with precision about medications when discussing her profession. Her knowledge seemed extensive, beyond what he typically encountered in pharmacists. "Traditional or compound pharmacy?" he asked. "Compound," she replied. "I specialized in alternative delivery methods for patients who couldn't tolerate standard formulations." There was a brief flash of passion in her eyes that quickly faded. "But that feels like another lifetime now." The conversation paused as Michael began to cry. Rebecca moved to stand, but Lucas gestured for her to remain seated. "I've got him. You need to rest." He retrieved the fussing infant and checked his diaper. "Looks like someone needs a change." Rebecca directed him to their dwindling supply of diapers. As Lucas efficiently changed the baby, a skill he'd developed during pediatric rotations, he continued their conversation. "The nearest hospital is in Helena," Rebecca nodded. "Daniel had a doctor in Pine Tree, but serious cases go to Helena." Her expression darkened. "That's where they told me nothing could have been done for him. The aneurysm was catastrophic." Lucas nodded sympathetically as he redressed Michael. "I'm sorry for your loss, truly." He hesitated, then added, "My father died unexpectedly when I was in medical school. Heart attack while hunting. One day he was there, the next, gone," Rebecca finished quietly, "leaving a hole that can't be filled." Their eyes met in shared understanding, a moment of connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Lucas felt an unexpected tug of empathy for this woman, who was fighting so hard to keep her family alive despite overwhelming odds. The moment broke when Lily yawned dramatically, reminding them of more immediate concerns. "Bedtime for you, I think," Rebecca said, smoothing her daughter's tangled hair. "But where will Dr. Lucas sleep?" Lily asked. It was a practical question they hadn't addressed. The cabin was small, 1 bedroom, the main living area, a tiny bathroom, and a mudroom entrance. "I'll be fine on the floor by the stove," Lucas assured them. "I've slept in far worse conditions during my residency." After settling Lily in the bedroom, Lucas helped Rebecca move to the other side of the bed. "You need proper rest," he insisted when she protested. "I'll look after Michael and wake you every few hours to check your concussion." Once the children and Rebecca were asleep, Lucas took stock of their situation. The storm continued unabated, rattling the windows and driving snow against the cabin in audible waves. The crack in the ceiling appeared stable for now, but he made a mental note to check the roof load when daylight returned. Their most pressing concern was supplies. The last bottle of formula would barely get Michael through the night. They had food for perhaps 2 days if strictly rationed. The firewood would last longer thanks to his earlier efforts, but they needed to conserve it carefully. Lucas sat by the stove, feeding small pieces of wood into the flames while Michael slept in his makeshift bed nearby. His medical training had prepared him for emergencies, but usually within the controlled environment of a hospital with equipment and resources at his disposal. Here, he was limited to his medical bag and whatever the cabin contained. As a half-Comanche physician, Lucas had always existed between worlds, respected for his medical expertise in one sphere and for his heritage in another. His grandfather had recognized this duality in him early, cultivating both his interest in traditional healing and his aptitude for modern medicine. Two paths of healing, his grandfather had told him, different trails to the same destination. Those words came back to him now, as he considered the challenges facing this small family. Western medicine had its limitations in their current situation. Perhaps some of his grandfather's wisdom might prove useful. In the flickering light of the stove, Lucas opened his medical bag again, searching through the side pocket where he kept a small leather pouch. Inside were various herbs and roots his grandfather had taught him to use, remedies trusted by the Comanche for generations. Among them was a bitter root that, when steeped in hot water, could help increase milk production in nursing mothers. Lucas had seen it work effectively when he'd volunteered at a remote clinic on the reservation. It wasn't in any medical textbooks, but he'd witnessed results firsthand. Tomorrow, he would suggest it to Rebecca if she was open to the idea. It might help address their most critical shortage, food for the infant, while buying them time until rescue became possible. Lucas added another log to the fire and settled back against the wall, preparing for a long night of monitoring his patience. Outside, the blizzard's fury reached new heights, but within the cabin, a fragile sense of hope had taken root. They had survived the first critical hours. Now they needed to endure whatever came next, together. As he watched over the sleeping family, Lucas found himself drawn to Rebecca's story in a way that surprised him. Her determination to save her children, despite impossible odds, resonated with something deep within him. There was strength in her that reminded him of the women in his father's family, a quiet, unshakable resilience. Michael stirred, whimpering softly. Lucas lifted the infant, cradling him against his chest, as he had done countless times with sick children in the hospital. The baby's breathing was already stronger than when he'd arrived, his skin warmer to the touch. "We'll get through this," Lucas whispered to the night. "All of us." The promise felt both professional and personal, a commitment that extended beyond his Hippocratic oath. Whatever it took, he would not let this family become another tragedy claimed by the merciless Montana winter. Not while he had breath in, his body and knowledge at his disposal. Knowledge from both the worlds that had shaped him into the healer he had become. Dawn broke with deceptive gentleness, pale light filtering through the frosted windows while the storm momentarily abated. Lucas had spent the night alternating between tending the fire, checking on Michael, and waking Rebecca every few hours to assess her concussion. Her responses had grown progressively more coherent, a positive sign that eased his most immediate medical concerns. He stood at the window now, surveying the transformed landscape. Snow had drifted against the cabin in 6-foot waves, effectively sealing the front door. The temperature readout on the porch thermometer showed 26 below zero, dangerously cold, but at least the wind had temporarily calmed. "How bad is it?" Rebecca's voice came from behind him. Lucas turned to find her standing in the bedroom doorway, one hand braced against the frame. She looked pale, but steadier than yesterday. "You shouldn't be up," he said, moving to help her. She waved him off. "I need to move around. My head feels clearer." She made her way carefully to the couch. "Lily and Michael are still sleeping. What's our situation?" Lucas appreciated her directness. "We're snowed in. The drifts are blocking the door and probably half the windows. Temperatures well below zero, but the wind has died down for now." He hesitated before delivering the more concerning news. Michael finished the last part of the formula during the night. Fear flashed across Rebecca's face. I tried to nurse him again a few hours ago, but there's almost nothing coming. Lucas took a seat across from her. There might be something. We can try. My grandfather was a Comanche healer. He taught me about certain plants that can help nursing mothers increase their milk supply. Rebecca's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious interest. You mean herbal galactagogues, like fenugreek or blessed thistle? Her immediate understanding and use of scientific terminology surprised him. Yes, exactly. I have a root in my medical bag that works similarly but more effectively in my experience. It's called blue cohosh, she interrupted. When he nodded, she continued, I studied alternative lactation supports during my pharmacy training. There's limited clinical research, but significant anecdotal evidence, particularly from indigenous medical traditions. Lucas found himself reassessing Rebecca Sullivan. Her knowledge was clearly more extensive than he'd initially assumed. I've seen it work, he confirmed. I volunteered at a clinic on the reservation where we combined traditional medicine with conventional approaches. Rebecca seemed to be weighing options they didn't really have. Finally, she nodded. I'll try anything that might help Michael. Lucas retrieved his leather pouch and selected a small piece of dried root. It needs to steep in hot water. The taste is bitter. I usually add honey, but fresh out of honey. Rebecca finished with a wry smile that transformed her face momentarily, hinting at the woman she might have been before tragedy struck. While preparing the tea on the wood stove, Lucas outlined their immediate challenges. Food is our most pressing concern, followed by heating. The generator's running low on fuel, so we should conserve it for emergencies only. Rebecca listened attentively, then surprised him with her response. There's a crawl space under the east side of the cabin. Daniel stored emergency supplies there, military-style MREs, some canned goods. I completely forgot about them until this morning. With my head injury. That's excellent news, Lucas said, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Do you know how to access it? There's a trap door in the bedroom closet. Daniel insisted on having backup supplies that wouldn't be immediately obvious to looters. His words. He was always preparing for unlikely scenarios. Her voice caught. Except the one that happened. Lucas handed her the tea, which she accepted with a grimace, before taking a careful sip. This tastes like concentrated lawn clippings. That's how you know it's working, Lucas replied with a small smile. Try to finish it all. While Rebecca forced down the bitter tea, Lucas checked on the children. Lily was still sleeping soundly, but Michael was beginning to stir. His color looked better this morning. The dehydration less severe after the formula and the small amounts of milk Rebecca had managed to provide. After changing Michael's diaper, Lucas brought him to Rebecca. Let's see if he'll nurse now. It might take a few hours for the herbs to have any effect, but it can't hurt to try. Rebecca positioned the baby at her breast with practiced movements. Michael latched on, but quickly grew frustrated, pulling away with angry cries. It's not working, Rebecca said, disappointment evident in her voice. Give it time, Lucas advised. Meanwhile, let's explore that crawl space. Can you watch Michael while I check it out? Rebecca nodded, cradling her fussing son while Lucas made his way to the bedroom. Inside the small closet, he found the trapdoor hidden beneath a rug, just as she had described. It opened to reveal a narrow ladder descending into darkness. Using his penlight, Lucas climbed down into a low-ceilinged space that ran beneath a portion of the cabin. Daniel Sullivan had indeed been prepared. At least a dozen MREs were stacked in waterproof containers, alongside cans of stew, fruit, and vegetables. A small crate contained extra batteries, candles, and waterproof matches. The discovery transformed their situation from desperate to merely challenging. With careful rationing, they now had food for at least a week. The storm wouldn't last that long. Eventually, roads would be cleared and help would arrive. When Lucas emerged from the crawl space with his arms full of supplies, he found Lily awake and sitting beside her mother. "Look what Dr. Lucas found," Rebecca was explaining. "Daddy's special food that he hid for emergencies." Lily's eyes widened. "Like treasure?" "Exactly like treasure," Lucas confirmed, setting his load on the kitchen counter. "And look what else. I found—" He held up a chocolate protein bar. "I think this counts as breakfast dessert, don't you?" Lily's face lit up, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. The simple joy of a child given an unexpected treat pierced something in Lucas, reminding him of how resilience could coexist with trauma, especially in the young. They prepared a breakfast of rehydrated eggs from an MRE, supplemented with canned peaches. The meal was far from gourmet, but after days of near starvation, it seemed like a feast to Rebecca and Lily. As they ate, Lucas observed the family dynamics. Despite her own weaknesses, Rebecca maintained a calm, reassuring presence for Lily, answering questions honestly but age-appropriately. The little girl clearly adored her mother, watching her for cues on how to respond to their situation. "My daddy was smart to hide food," Lily declared between bites of peaches. "Very smart," Lucas agreed. "He was taking good care of you, even when he couldn't be here." Rebecca's eyes glistened at this, but she blinked rapidly and changed the subject. "Dr. Blackwood, what brought you to Montana? You mentioned your mother is from here, but your father was Comanche from Oklahoma?" Lucas recognized her deflection, but followed her lead. "My parents met when my father came to Montana State University on a wrestling scholarship. My mother was studying nursing. They were an unlikely match. He was from the reservation. She was from an old Helena family. Were their families supportive?" Rebecca asked. Lucas laughed softly. "Not initially. My maternal grandfather threatened to disown my mother, but she was stubborn. They eloped and moved to Oklahoma after graduation. Yet, you ended up back in Montana. After my father died, my mother wanted to be closer to her family. I was already in medical school by then. I did my residency at the University of Washington, then took the position at St. Matthew's." Lucas paused, remembering. "My father's family understood. They believe the spirit guides you where you need to be." "And do you believe that?" Rebecca asked, her expression thoughtful. The question was more complex than it appeared on the surface. Lucas considered his answer carefully. "I believe in science and medicine, that's my training. But I've also seen things that don't fit neatly into textbook explanations. Patients who recovered when statistically they shouldn't have. Treatments that worked better than clinical trials suggested they would. The art versus the science of medicine," Rebecca offered. "Exactly. My grandfather would say there are many paths to healing, and wisdom comes from recognizing which path each person needs." Their philosophical discussion was interrupted when Michael began crying again, hungry cries that tore at Rebecca's heart. She lifted her shirt to try nursing him once more, and this time, to everyone's surprise, the baby latched on and began to feed. "It's working," she whispered, looking up at Lucas with wonder. "The tea," he confirmed, "though usually it takes longer. You must have been very responsive to it." Rebecca stroked Michael's head as he nursed. "When I was studying compound pharmaceuticals, I researched bioavailability rates among different genetic populations. Some people metabolize certain compounds more efficiently than others." "Fascinating field," Lucas commented. "What drew you to compound pharmacy specifically?" A shadow crossed Rebecca's face. "My mother had severe medication sensitivities. Standard formulations caused intolerable side effects. I watched her suffer for years before a compound pharmacist finally created versions she could tolerate." She paused. "I wanted to do that for others." As Michael continued nursing, Lucas checked on their firewood supply. "We should be set for heat for another 2 or 3 days, but I'd like to bring in more if the storm breaks long enough." The shed has more splitting tools, Rebecca offered. There are fallen logs behind it that Daniel had been processing gradually. Their conversation continued throughout the morning, an exchange of personal histories that helped fill the isolated hours. Lucas learned that Rebecca had grown up in Pittsburgh, the only child of academic parents. Her father taught economics at Carnegie Mellon, her mother European literature. Both had died before Lily was born, her father from cancer, her mother from complications of the multiple sclerosis that had prompted Rebecca's interest in compound pharmaceuticals. Daniel was my anchor after they died, she admitted. We met in college. He was the teaching assistant in my required biology course. I was terrible at it, and he spent hours helping me understand cellular respiration. From tutoring to romance? Lucas asked with a small smile. It took him 3 months to work up the courage to ask me out, Rebecca recalled, a brief lightness entering her voice. He was brilliant with wildlife, but awkward with people. Her expression softened with memory. Except with Lily. From the moment she was born, they had this connection. Her voice broke, and Lucas gave her the space to compose herself. I'm sorry, she said finally. It still hits in waves. Grief has its own timeline, Lucas said quietly. My father died 12 years ago, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. The day passed in this rhythm of practical tasks and personal revelations. Lucas changed Michael's diaper with increasing confidence, marveling at how quickly one could adapt to unfamiliar responsibilities. Rebecca's strength gradually returned, though she still moved cautiously to avoid aggravating her head injury. By mid-afternoon, the storm had intensified again, wind howling around the cabin's corners like a living thing. The brief lull that morning now seemed like nature's cruel tease. It's going to be a long night, Lucas observed, eyeing the windows as snow pelted against the glass. Rebecca nodded, wrapping a blanket more tightly around her shoulders. Despite their improved circumstances, the cabin remained cold except near the stove, where they had created a communal living area of blankets and cushions. Your turn, she said, returning to their ongoing conversation. Why emergency medicine? With your interest in traditional healing, I would have expected family practice or integrative medicine. Lucas poked at the fire, considering the question. I like the immediacy of emergency medicine, making quick decisions that directly save lives. But there's another reason. He hesitated, then continued. On the reservation, we had limited emergency services. When my cousin was thrown from a horse, it took nearly 2 hours for an ambulance to reach him. He died from a treatable head injury because help came too late. I'm so sorry, Rebecca said softly. I wanted to be the doctor who arrived in time, Lucas finished simply. Whether that meant working in an ER where every second counts or volunteering with rural outreach programs that bring emergency care to remote communities. Rebecca studied him with new understanding. Is that why you were out in this storm? Bringing supplies to Pine Tree? Lucas nodded. The clinic there serves several outlying communities. They were running low on critical medications, including emergency childbirth supplies, Rebecca guessed, glancing toward her medical bag. Among other things, he confirmed. Their conversation was interrupted by Lily, who had been quietly playing with some toys in the corner. Dr. Lucas, can you fix my mom's head like you fixed Michael's tummy? The innocent question hung in the air between them. Dr. Lucas has helped my head a lot, Rebecca answered before he could respond. Remember how sleepy I was yesterday? That was because my brain got bumped during my fall. He's been giving me medicine and checking to make sure I'm getting better. Lily considered this, then asked, but Michael was really sick and now he's better. Can you make Mommy all better too? Lucas moved to sit beside the little girl. Bodies heal at different speeds, Lily. Your brother was mainly hungry and cold, problems we could fix quickly. Your mom hit her head, which takes longer to heal. But she's doing very well. She's still sad about Daddy, though, Lily continued with childlike directness. Can you fix that too? Rebecca inhaled sharply, pain flashing across her features. Lucas chose his words carefully. Some kinds of hurt can't be fixed with medicine. When we lose someone we love, the sadness lives in our hearts, not our bodies. That kind of healing happens very slowly, and it's different for everyone. Lily frowned, processing this unsatisfactory answer. My teacher said Daddy is watching us from heaven. Is that true? Rebecca and Lucas exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible. Questions children could pose. What do you think? Lucas asked gently. Lily's brow furrowed in concentration. I think he must be, because he loved us very much, and you don't stop loving people just because you go to heaven. She paused, considering. But I don't think he can see us right now because of the snow. It's probably blocking his view. The simple logic of her conclusion brought unexpected tears to Rebecca's eyes. Lucas noticed her struggling and diverted Lily's attention. Hey, how about we check on the generator? Your mom told me you're a good helper. The distraction worked, and Lily eagerly pulled on her sweater to accompany him to the mudroom, where the small generator was housed. While they checked the fuel levels, Lucas heard a quiet sob from the main room. Rebecca finally allowing herself a moment of grief when her daughter couldn't witness it. When they returned, Rebecca had composed herself, though her eyes remained red-rimmed. How are we looking? About a quarter tank left, Lucas reported. We should be fine if we run it just a few hours a day to keep the pipes from freezing. As evening approached, Lucas stepped outside briefly to gauge the weather. The temperature had dropped further, and the wind cut through his clothing like blades of ice. The sky was a solid mass of grey-white, offering no hint of the storm's end. Their situation remained precarious despite the found supplies. If the extreme cold continued too long, pipes could freeze and burst, and the structural integrity of the cabin would be at risk from snow loads and thermal stresses. Back inside, Lucas found Rebecca attempting to nurse Michael again. To her evident relief, the baby latched on eagerly, feeding with growing strength. The tea is definitely working, she said with wonder. I can actually feel the difference, Lucas smiled. My grandfather would be pleased. He always said Western medicine treats the body, while traditional medicine remembers the connection between body and spirit. What would he make of a pharmacist? Using Comanche remedies? Rebecca asked with a hint of humor. He'd say knowledge belongs to those who respect it, regardless of where they were born. Lucas hesitated, then added, he believed in unlikely connections, that sometimes people from different worlds are brought together for purposes greater than they understand. The implication of his words hung between them as night fell over the isolated cabin. Outside, the blizzard raged unchecked, while inside, 4 people from vastly different backgrounds had formed an unexpected bond in the face of mortality. A doctor with feet in 2 worlds, a widowed mother fighting for her children's survival, and 2 young lives whose futures hung in the balance of forces beyond their control. As Lily and Michael drifted to sleep in the makeshift bed near the stove, Rebecca and Lucas sat in the flickering firelight, sharing the final cup of blue cohosh tea. Why did you really move to Montana? Lucas asked quietly. You mentioned doing it for Daniel and the children, but... Rebecca stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. I thought I could outrun grief. My parents, my career aspirations, the life I had pictured for myself, all of it changed or disappeared within a few years. Daniel represented stability, a fresh start, she sighed. But you can't outrun who you are or what you've lost. It follows you, even to the mountains. And who are you, Rebecca Sullivan? Lucas asked, his voice gentle. Beyond wife, mother, pharmacist. Who is the woman at the core? The question seemed to startle her. I don't know anymore, she admitted with raw honesty. I've been defined by others for so long. Daughter, student, wife, mother. When Daniel died, it was like the last piece of my identity went with him. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. Who am I now? A widow with 2 children stranded in a storm, dependent on the kindness of a stranger. I see more than that, Lucas said quietly. I see a woman of extraordinary resilience and intelligence, someone who understands both science and compassion. A mother who would die protecting her children, yes, but also a healer in her own right. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly at his perception. Before she could respond, Michael stirred and began to fuss. As she moved to comfort him, Lucas watched her calm, efficient movements and wondered about the untapped potential that circumstances had buried beneath layers of loss and survival. He hadn't expected to find such a kindred spirit in this isolated cabin, someone who understood both the science of healing and its deeper purpose. Whatever happened when the storm finally broke, Lucas knew that his path had irrevocably crossed with Rebecca Sullivan's, and like his grandfather might say, such crossings were rarely accidents of fate. The blizzard's fury reached its peak during the night, wind shrieking around the cabin like a living entity intent on finding entry. Lucas maintained his vigil by the stove, feeding the fire and checking on his makeshift family every hour. Rebecca's concussion symptoms had improved dramatically, allowing her proper rest for the first time since his arrival. Near dawn, he dozed off briefly, only to be awakened by a small hand on his shoulder. "Dr. Lucas," Lily whispered, her face pale in the dying firelight. "Something's wrong with Michael." Lucas was instantly alert, following the little girl to where Michael lay beside Rebecca. The infant's breathing seemed labored, his tiny chest rising and falling concerning irregularity. Lucas's medical training took over as he gently lifted the baby, careful not to wake Rebecca. Michael's skin felt hot against his hands. Too hot. Using his penlight, Lucas examined the infant's eyes, ears, and throat. The baby's gums appeared, inflamed, and when Lucas pressed gently on the lymph nodes beneath Michael's jaw, the infant whimpered. "What is it?" Lily asked, watching with solemn eyes. "He has a fever," Lucas explained quietly. "Probably an infection. Let's let your mum sleep a little longer while I take care of him." Lucas carried Michael to the kitchen area, where he dampened a clean cloth with cool water and applied it to the baby's forehead. His mind raced through the limited options. He had basic antibiotics in his medical bag, but dosing an infant properly without the ability to run tests would be challenging and potentially dangerous. Rebecca stirred and sat up, instantly alert, when she saw Lucas holding her son. "What's happened?" "He has a fever," Lucas reported, his voice calm but serious. "Possibly an ear infection or something viral. How was he behaving yesterday?" Rebecca moved to them quickly, maternal instinct, overriding her own physical limitations. "He was fussy before bed, but I thought he was just hungry." She took Michael from Lucas, examining her son with a growing alarm. "He's burning up, 10228, when I checked a few minutes ago," Lucas confirmed. "I have some infant acetaminophen that might help bring it down, but we need to determine what's causing it." Rebecca's expression shifted subtly as she carefully examined her son, her fingers gently probing around his ears, then checking his gums. Lucas watched with professional interest as she conducted what appeared to be a remarkably thorough examination. "Look at this," she said finally, opening the baby's mouth and pointing to an area along his gum line. "There's inflammation and what looks like the beginning of an abscess on the upper right side." Lucas leaned in, surprised by her precise observation. She was right. There was a small but definite infection developing in the baby's mouth. "Good catch," he said, with genuine admiration. "That could definitely be causing the fever." "How did you know to check there?" Rebecca hesitated, seeming almost embarrassed. "I've always had a knack for finding the source of infections. My mother's MS treatments caused frequent secondary infections, and I got good at identifying them before her doctors did. Lucas sensed there was more to the story than she was sharing, but the immediate concern was treating Michael. I have topical antibiotics in my bag, but they're not ideal for an oral infection in an infant, he said, thinking aloud. We could try diluting them, but the risk of improper dosing. What about a natural approach? Rebecca suggested. Something to draw out the infection while we treat the fever and wait for proper medical care. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. My grandfather used a poultice for oral infections, white oak bark mixed with a small amount of golden seal. I have both in my kit, but I've never used it on someone so young. Rebecca seemed to consider this, then made a decision. Let me look at what you have. I might be able to compound something appropriate for an infant. As Lucas retrieved his medicine pouch, Rebecca asked Lily to watch Michael for a moment. The little girl took her role seriously, sitting beside her brother and gently stroking his hair. Lucas spread his collection of medicinal plants on the kitchen counter, explaining each one's properties as Rebecca examined them with evident knowledge. This white oak bark has natural astringent properties, he explained, traditionally used to reduce inflammation and fight infection. The golden seal is a powerful antimicrobial, but it's very strong. Rebecca nodded, already separating small amounts of each. We need to extract the beneficial compounds while minimizing anything too harsh for an infant. She looked up at him. Do you have any calendula? It would help soothe the gum tissue. Lucas was impressed by her immediate understanding. Small pouch in the bottom of the bag. As Rebecca worked, a transformation came over her. The uncertainty and grief that had clouded her features gave way to confident precision. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, measuring tiny amounts of each herb, then grinding them with a mortar and pestle that Lucas used for his traditional remedies. I'll need to extract these in warm water, then filter out the solid matter, she explained, working as she spoke. Then I can mix the liquid with a bit of the lanolin from your first aid kit to create a salve that will adhere to his gum. That's essentially what my grandfather would have done, Lucas said, watching her work with growing admiration. But you're adding refinements I wouldn't have considered. Rebecca glanced up briefly. Pharmaceutical compounding is about understanding how different elements interact, beneficial compounds, delivery mechanisms, patient-specific factors. The principles apply whether you're working with commercial pharmaceuticals or natural medicines. As she prepared the remedy, Rebecca explained each step with a clarity that revealed her deep understanding of biochemical processes. She adjusted ratios with confidence, explaining how an infant's unique physiology required specific adaptations. The golden seal contains berberine, which has powerful antimicrobial properties but can be too strong for an infant. By balancing it with the tannins in white oak bark and the triterpenoids in calendula, we create a synergistic effect that's both gentler and more effective. Lucas listened, fascinated. Where did you learn all this? This goes well beyond standard pharmacy training. A shadow crossed Rebecca's face. My mother was allergic to most commercial medications. After years of watching her suffer through side effects, I became obsessed with finding alternatives. I studied traditional medicines from various cultures, looking for patterns and principles that could be applied using modern understanding of biochemistry. She continued working as she spoke, her hands never faltering. My professors thought I was wasting my time. Some called it pseudoscience, but I kept researching, documenting, testing within safe parameters. Did it help your mother? Lucas asked gently. Rebecca's hands paused momentarily. Yes, eventually. I created several compounds that allowed her to manage symptoms without the side effects. Her neurologist was stunned by the improvements. Pain flickered across her features. But MS is progressive. I could ease her suffering, but couldn't stop the disease. The revelation of Rebecca's specialized knowledge explained much about her. The precision of her observations, her immediate understanding of the blue cohosh tea, her astute questions about his medical approaches. But Lucas sensed this was just the surface of something deeper. When the remedy was complete, they applied a small amount to Michael's inflamed gum. The baby fussed initially, then settled as the herbal mixture apparently provided some relief. They followed with a carefully measured dose of infant acetaminophen to address the fever. "Now we wait," Rebecca said, cradling her son. "If my calculations are correct, we should see improvement within a few hours." "I believe we will," Lucas agreed, making notes in his medical journal about the compound Rebecca had created. "What you just did, that combination of scientific precision and traditional knowledge, it's remarkable." Rebecca looked uncomfortable with the praise. "It's just something I can do." "It's a rare gift," Lucas countered. "Most conventionally trained practitioners dismiss traditional remedies without understanding their biochemical foundations, and most traditional healers lack the scientific framework to refine and adapt their remedies for specific patients." "Like your grandfather," Rebecca observed. "He understood the remedies worked, but perhaps not always why they worked." Lucas nodded. "Exactly. He knew which plants helped which conditions through generations of passed-down knowledge and observation. But you just bridged that gap, explaining the biochemical mechanisms while respecting the traditional applications." Their conversation was interrupted when Lily approached, hungry for breakfast. The storm continued outside, though the winds had diminished slightly overnight. They prepared a simple meal from their emergency stores, all while monitoring Michael closely. By mid-morning, the baby's fever had reduced noticeably. His breathing seemed easier, and when Rebecca checked his gum, the inflammation appeared less angry. "It's working," she said with evident relief. "Your compound is working," Lucas corrected. "That's twice now you've demonstrated exceptional pharmaceutical skill in less than ideal conditions." Rebecca fed Michael, who nursed with more vigor than the previous day. "The blue cohosh tea helped too," she acknowledged. "Your grandfather's knowledge combined with my application." As they settled into the day's rhythm, Lucas found himself watching Rebecca with new appreciation. There was more to her knack than she was admitting. Her observations were too precise, her understanding too intuitive. Around midday, a brief lull in the storm presented an opportunity to check conditions outside. Lucas donned his cold-weather gear and ventured out to assess damage and replenish their firewood supply. The world beyond the cabin door had been transformed into an alien landscape. Snow had drifted against the cabin in sculptural waves, some nearly reaching the roofline. The temperature remained bitterly cold, but the wind had died down enough to make outdoor work possible. Lucas spent an hour clearing snow from around the door and windows, then checked the roof. The crack they'd noticed earlier hadn't worsened, but substantial snow load remained. Using branches as makeshift poles, he managed to knock some of the accumulation off the most vulnerable areas. By the time he returned inside, his fingers were numb despite his gloves, and his face burned from cold exposure. Rebecca had prepared hot coffee using their precious fuel supply, a luxury that felt medicinal after his time in the elements. "The radio's working," she informed him as he warmed his hands around the mug. "I caught part of a weather report. They're saying the storm should break by tomorrow afternoon, but roads will remain impassable for at least 2 more days." Lucas nodded, processing this information. "That fits what I'm seeing out there. We're buried in at least 4 feet of snow, with drifts much higher. Even when plows get through on the main roads, your access road won't be cleared for some time." "How's your truck?" Rebecca asked. "Completely buried. I couldn't even see where it was from here." He took another sip of coffee. "How's Michael?" "Better," Rebecca reported with a small smile. "Temperature's nearly normal, and he's sleeping peacefully. The inflammation is visibly reduced. Lily had been quietly playing with a set of wooden blocks, but now she approached them. Is the storm monster going away soon? Lucas smiled at her characterization. Yes, it's getting tired and will go to sleep tomorrow. Then can we go to town? I want to see Miss Carroll at the library. She reads stories with funny voices. Rebecca and Lucas exchanged a glance. Not right away, sweetheart, Rebecca explained. Even when the snow stops falling, the roads will be covered for a while. But Dr. Lucas will help us until we can get to town. Lucas nodded agreement, though he knew the reality was more complicated. His truck was disabled, and they had no way to contact emergency services. Even once the storm ended, they would still be effectively stranded until someone came looking for them, which might happen soon for him, as the hospital would wonder about his failed delivery. But Rebecca and her children had been planning to weather the storm alone. No one might check on them for days. As evening approached, Michael's condition continued to improve, confirming the effectiveness of Rebecca's remedy. Lucas documented every detail in his journal, fascinated by the precise combination she had created. Have you ever considered publishing your methods? He asked, as they prepared dinner. The medical community could benefit enormously from this kind of integrated approach. Rebecca tensed slightly. I tried once, submitted a paper on alternative delivery methods for MS medications incorporating elements of traditional medicine. It was rejected by every journal. One reviewer called it dangerous encouragement of unproven remedies. That's frustratingly narrow-minded, Lucas said, though not surprising. Western medicine struggles to acknowledge anything it didn't originate. Is that why you keep your traditional remedies separate from your hospital practice? Rebecca asked perceptively. Lucas considered her question. Partly. It's also because healing happens in context. Some remedies work better when accompanied by the cultural practices, beliefs, and ceremonies that traditionally surround them. Taking them out of that context sometimes diminishes their effectiveness, the psychosomatic component of healing, Rebecca suggested. More than that, my grandfather would say it's about treating the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. Western medicine excels at treating the body, but often neglects the other aspects. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. I've seen that divide. During my mother's illness, her doctors focused entirely on physical symptoms while ignoring how treatments affected her mentally and emotionally. As darkness fell, another frigid night began. They had settled into a functional routine. Lucas, maintaining the fire and monitoring their supplies, Rebecca caring for the children with increasing strength, both adults taking turns sleeping. Near midnight, with Lily and Michael both asleep, Rebecca joined Lucas by the stove. She had been unusually quiet since their earlier conversation about her rejected research. There's something I haven't told you, she said finally, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire, about my abilities. Lucas waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace. It's more than just pharmaceutical knowledge or good observation. Rebecca stared into the flames. Since I was young, I've been able to sense what's wrong in a sick person. Not in some mystical way, but more like seeing patterns others miss. Like with Michael's infection, Lucas prompted gently. She nodded. I can look at someone who's ill and often pinpoint exactly where the problem is originating, even when symptoms seem unrelated or confusing. It's like seeing connections that aren't visible to others. A diagnostic intuition, Lucas suggested. My mother called it my magic touch, Rebecca said with a sad smile. The few times I tried to explain it to medical professionals, they dismissed it as coincidence or suggested I was noticing subtle physical cues subconsciously, but you don't believe that's all it is. Rebecca shook her head. It's more consistent than that, more precise. When I was studying pharmacy, I could often predict which medications would cause adverse reactions in specific patients before they tried them. She looked up at him, gauging his reaction. "You must think I sound delusional." "Not at all," Lucas replied honestly. "My grandfather could look at a patient and know which plant would heal them, not through any supernatural power, but through a lifetime of observation, combined with an intuitive gift that can't be easily explained by Western science." "Daniel thought I should have become a doctor instead of a pharmacist," Rebecca continued, "but I was more interested in creating solutions than diagnosing problems, and honestly, I was afraid of not being taken seriously." "With good reason," Lucas acknowledged. "Medicine can be hierarchical and dismissive of anything that challenges established paradigms." Rebecca pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them like a shield. "After we moved here, I buried that part of myself. There was no place for it in our new life. Daniel was building his career. We had Lily. Then Michael came along," she trailed off. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever find my way back to that work." The vulnerability in her admission stirred something in Lucas. Here was a woman who possessed an extraordinary gift, one that complemented his own training and heritage in unexpected ways. Yet circumstances and conventional thinking had conspired to diminish that gift, pushing it into the shadows. "The world needs healers like you, Rebecca," he said quietly. "People who can bridge different realms of knowledge, who see beyond the obvious to the interconnections. Even if the medical establishment doesn't recognize its value, especially then," Lucas insisted. "My grandfather never sought validation from Western medicine, yet he healed countless people. The system had failed. Your gift may not fit neatly into conventional categories, but that doesn't diminish its importance." For the first time since he'd met her, Rebecca's expression held something beyond grief and determination, a flicker of possibility, of a future where her unique abilities might find purpose again. "If we survive this storm," she said with tentative hope, "maybe there's a way forward I haven't seen yet." Lucas reached out, briefly touching her hand. "We'll survive, and when we do, I'd like to help you explore that path, whatever it might be." The moment between them lingered, charged with unspoken potential, not just for their immediate survival, but for something beyond the storm that neither had anticipated finding in this isolated cabin where loss and chance had brought them together. Outside, the wind began to diminish perceptibly, the first sign that the storm might finally be loosening its grip on the Montana wilderness. Inside, something new was taking root. A recognition between two healers from different worlds that together they might offer something neither could provide alone. Dawn broke on their fourth day together with a startling silence. The constant howl of wind that had formed the backdrop of their existence had finally ceased, leaving an eerie quiet in its wake. Lucas stood at the window, watching as the first rays of sunlight created diamond sparkles across the vast white expanse outside. "It's over," he announced as Rebecca joined him, Michael sleeping peacefully in her arms. "The storm has passed." The sky above was a clear, piercing blue that seemed almost shocking after days of relentless grey. The temperature remained bitterly cold. The thermometer on the porch read 15 below zero, but without wind, the morning held a crystalline beauty that belied the danger of their situation. "What now?" Rebecca asked, her voice both hopeful and uncertain. "Now we assess and plan," Lucas replied, slipping into the pragmatic mode that had served him well in countless emergency situations. "The roads will be impassable for days, but eventually someone will come looking for me when I don't return to Helena. How long might that take? The hospital knows my route and the location of the Pine Tree Clinic. Once the main highways are cleared, they'll send someone. Maybe tomorrow, possibly the day after." Rebecca nodded, processing this information. "So we wait." "We wait," Lucas confirmed, "and prepare." Preparation involved physical labor that Lucas insisted on handling alone, despite Rebecca's protests that her strength had largely returned. He spent hours outside, clearing paths around the cabin, checking the roof for structural damage, and assessing their overall situation. The news wasn't entirely positive. His truck, buried beneath a massive drift a mile down the mountain, was inaccessible without heavy equipment. The cabin's generator had only enough fuel for perhaps one more day of intermittent use. And though the main part of the blizzard had passed, the forecast Lucas had heard on their battery radio warned of another smaller system moving in within 48 hours. Inside, Rebecca focused on inventory and organization, cataloging their remaining supplies while caring for the children. Michael's recovery continued steadily, his fever gone, the gum infection responding well to Rebecca's improvised treatment. Lily had adapted to their strange circumstances with remarkable resilience, treating the whole experience as an adventure now that the immediate crisis had passed. By mid-afternoon, Lucas had created a narrow path from the cabin to the road and had managed to erect a makeshift signal flag on a tall pine near the property entrance, a piece of Rebecca's red blanket tied to a branch, visible from a considerable distance. When he returned inside, stamping snow from his boots in the mudroom, he found Rebecca at the kitchen table, head bent over a notebook, writing intently. "What's that?" he asked, warming his hands by the stove. "Formulations," she replied without looking up. "I'm documenting everything we've done for Michael. The exact compounds, proportions, application methods, observed results." Lucas poured himself a cup of the coffee she'd prepared, noting that it was the last of their supply. Planning to publish after all. Rebecca finally met his eyes, a new determination in her expression. "Maybe, or at least preserve the knowledge. What we did worked, Lucas. A treatment that combined traditional medicine with modern understanding, adapted specifically for an infant patient." She gestured to where Michael played contentedly on a blanket. "The proof is right there." Lucas sat across from her, studying her animated features. The change in her was remarkable, the grief and desperation of their first meeting tempered now by purpose and focus. "You're good at this," he observed. "Not just the compounding, but the whole process. Observation, diagnosis, treatment formulation." "It feels right," she admitted softly. "For the first time since before we moved here, I feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to do." The moment was interrupted by the crackle of the radio, which had been playing quietly in the background. The local emergency broadcast system announced that road crews had reached the outskirts of Pine Tree and were working to clear access to outlying areas. "They'll reach the main road near your turnoff by tomorrow," Lucas translated, "but your access road isn't on their priority list." Rebecca's expression remained steadier than he might have expected just days earlier. "We have enough supplies to last a few more days. We'll be fine." "We will," Lucas agreed, then hesitated before continuing. "But what happens after that? When will we return to the outside world?" The question hung between them, laden with implications neither had fully articulated. Their connection had formed and deepened in isolation, but the real world waited beyond. The snow-packed roads, a world of practicalities, expectations, and uncertain futures. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "Everything's changed." Before Lucas could respond, Lily called from the living area where she'd been playing with wooden blocks. "Someone's coming!" Both adults moved quickly to the window. In the distance, they could make out a figure on snowshoes, laboriously making his way up the newly cleared path toward the cabin. "It's a search party," Lucas said, relief evident in his voice. "Someone found my truck and followed the tracks." As the figure drew closer, Rebecca frowned. "That's not a rescue worker. It's Marshall Taylor, our closest neighbor. The man who approached was in his 60s, heavily bundled against the cold, with a rifle slung across his back, a precaution against predators, Lucas assumed, rather than a threatening gesture. He reached the cabin porch and knocked forcefully. Lucas opened the door, letting in a blast of frigid air, along with their visitor. Marshal Taylor stepped inside, pushing back his hood to reveal a weathered face with suspicious eyes that moved from Lucas to Rebecca and back again. "Thought I'd check on you folks," he said gruffly to Rebecca, barely acknowledging Lucas. "Saw smoke from your chimney and wanted to make sure you and the little ones were all right after that monster storm." "We're fine, Marshal," Rebecca replied. "This is Dr. Lucas Blackwood. His truck went off the road during the storm and he found us here. We've been helping each other survive." Taylor's gaze sharpened as he took in Lucas more fully, clearly noting his native features. "Doctor, huh? From where exactly?" "St. Matthew's Hospital in Helena," Lucas answered evenly, accustomed to such scrutiny. "Emergency medicine." Taylor grunted non-committally. "Roads are cleared to my place," he informed Rebecca, effectively dismissing Lucas. "Beth sent along some supplies, figuring you might be running low." He unslung a pack from his shoulder, placing it on the table. "Bread. She baked this morning, some canned goods, coffee." "That's incredibly thoughtful," Rebecca said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "Please thank her for us. She also wanted me to tell you that you and the kids are welcome to stay with us until your road gets cleared. We've got plenty of room, and Beth would appreciate the company." Taylor's gaze slid briefly toward Lucas. "No need for you to be stuck out here alone." The implication was clear. Taylor's invitation explicitly excluded Lucas. "That's very kind," Rebecca replied diplomatically, "but I think we're managing well here. The children are settled, and Dr. Blackwood has been monitoring Michael, who had a slight infection." Taylor's expression turned concerned. "The baby's sick? All the more reason to come to our place. Beth raised 4 of our own. She knows how to handle little ones with fever." "Michael is doing much better," Lucas interjected professionally. "The infection is responding well to treatment." Taylor ignored him, focusing solely on Rebecca. "Think about it. Roads to town might not be cleared for another 3-4 days. That's a long time to be stuck out here with limited supplies." "I'll certainly consider it," Rebecca said, her tone making it clear the discussion was concluded. Recognizing his dismissal, Taylor nodded stiffly. "I'll be heading back then. Sunset's early this time of year, and I'd rather not be out after dark." He turned to leave, then paused. "Sheriff Collins is organizing wellness checks for outlying properties. Told him I'd let him know you were okay. Anything you want me to tell him?" Rebecca hesitated, glancing briefly at Lucas. "Just that we're fine, and don't need emergency assistance at this time." After Taylor departed, an uncomfortable silence filled the cabin. The outside world had intruded into their isolated sanctuary, bringing with it complexities they'd temporarily escaped. "Well, that was awkward," Rebecca finally said, unpacking the supplies Taylor had delivered. "Marshall means well, but he's old-fashioned." "You mean prejudiced," Lucas corrected mildly. "It's all right. I'm used to it." Rebecca looked up sharply. "It's not all right, and you shouldn't have to be used to it." Lucas appreciated her indignation on his behalf, but practical concerns took precedence. "His visit raises an important point, though. We need to think about next steps. If Sheriff Collins is doing welfare checks, they'll likely reach us within a day or two." "And then what?" Rebecca asked, voicing the question that hung between them. "You return to your life in Helena, and I... what? Go back to trying to survive? Here alone with 2 small children? Return to Pittsburgh?" The question carried weight beyond its practical implications. In their few days together, something had formed between them, a connection both personal and professional that neither had anticipated. "There might be another option," Lucas said carefully. "The hospital in Helena has been considering a new approach to rural health care. Mobile clinics that could serve remote communities like Pine Tree and surrounding homesteads. They've had trouble finding physicians willing to split their time between the hospital and rural outreach. You're considering taking on that role? Rebecca guessed. Lucas nodded. I've been thinking about it for months. This experience has convinced me it's needed. He paused, choosing his next words deliberately. Such a program would also benefit someone with pharmaceutical expertise, especially someone who understands how to adapt treatments for patients with limited access to conventional medications. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly as she grasped his meaning. You're suggesting I could be involved professionally. I'm suggesting it would be a perfect application of your unique abilities, Lucas clarified. Creating customized treatments that bridge traditional and modern approaches, specifically for rural and isolated patients. The possibility hung in the air between them, a future neither had envisioned before the storm had thrown them together. It sounds ideal, Rebecca admitted, but there are practical obstacles. I'm a widow with 2 young children, one still nursing. I have no job, limited savings, and a mortgage on a property that's proven dangerously isolated. All valid concerns, Lucas acknowledged, but not insurmountable ones. Their conversation was interrupted by Michael's hungry cries. As Rebecca moved to feed him, Lucas checked the radio for updated weather and road conditions. The news was mixed. Main highways were being cleared, but the forecast confirmed another weather system approaching within 36 hours. Their window for evacuation might be brief. Throughout the evening, a new tension hummed beneath their interactions. Not unpleasant, but charged with possibilities and uncertainties. Lily sensed it too, growing uncharacteristically clingy as bedtime approached. "Are you leaving soon?" she asked Lucas, as he read her a story from a book found on the cabin's small shelf. "Eventually, I'll need to get back to the hospital," he answered honestly. "Will you come back to visit us?" Lucas glanced at Rebecca, who was pretending not to listen while preparing Michael for bed. "I hope so, if your mom's okay with that." "She likes you," Lily informed him with a child's directness. "She smiles more when you're talking," Rebecca flushed slightly but didn't contradict her daughter. After the children were asleep, Rebecca and Lucas sat before the fire, sharing the fresh bread and coffee Taylor had brought, luxuries that tasted extraordinary after days of rationed emergency supplies. "If we're being realistic," Rebecca began, "there are significant barriers to the scenario you outlined. The medical establishment hasn't exactly embraced integrative approaches like mine." "True," Lucas acknowledged, "but things are changing. Patients are increasingly demanding complementary therapies, and hospitals are beginning to respond, however reluctantly. And then there's the professional issue," she continued. "I haven't practiced pharmacy in over 2 years. My license needs renewal, and finding childcare in a rural area." "One step at a time," Lucas interrupted gently. "First, we get through the immediate situation. Then we can explore possibilities." Rebecca studied him across the flickering firelight. "Why are you so invested in this? In us? You barely know me." It was a fair question, one Lucas had been asking himself. "Part of it is professional. I recognize exceptional talent when I see it, and what you can offer patients is unique. But—" he hesitated, then continued with honesty. "There's something else. My grandfather would call it recognizing a kindred spirit." "And what would Dr. Blackwood call it?" Rebecca asked softly. "An unexpected connection I'm not willing to walk away from without exploring further." The admission hung in the air between them, not quite a declaration, but an acknowledgement of possibilities. Rebecca's response was interrupted by a sound they hadn't heard in days, the rumble of an engine approaching the cabin. They exchanged a surprised glance before moving to the window. Headlights cut through the early evening darkness as a large vehicle with chains on its tires navigated the newly cleared path. "Sheriff's Department," Lucas observed, making out the logo on the SUV's door. "Looks like those welfare checks are happening sooner than expected." The vehicle parked, and two figures emerged, a uniformed deputy and a woman in a heavy parka, marked with the logo of Montana Child Protective Services. Rebecca inhaled sharply. Why would CPS be doing welfare checks? The question answered itself moments later when a knock came at the door. Lucas opened it to find the deputy, a young man with a serious expression, and the CPS worker, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and a professionally neutral demeanor. "Ms. Sullivan?" the woman asked, looking past Lucas to Rebecca. "I'm Patricia Winters from Child Protective Services. We received a concern about the welfare of your children during the storm emergency." "My children are fine," Rebecca replied, her voice tightening. "As you can see, we have heat, food, and medical care." She gestured toward Lucas. "Dr. Blackwood from St. Matthew's Hospital in Helena has been with us since the storm began." The deputy nodded at Lucas with professional courtesy, but Winters remained focused on Rebecca. "We understand you've been through a difficult time, Ms. Sullivan," she said, her tone carefully modulated. "Losing your husband so recently, then facing this severe storm in an isolated location with two very young children. A neighbor expressed concern about your judgment in remaining here during a declared weather emergency. The implication was clear. Someone, likely Marshall Taylor, had suggested Rebecca's decision-making put her children at risk." Lucas felt a surge of protective anger on Rebecca's behalf. "If I may," he interjected, "Ms. Sullivan has demonstrated exceptional care for her children under extremely difficult circumstances. When my vehicle was disabled during the storm and I found shelter here, she was taking every possible measure to ensure their safety and comfort." Winters turned her attention to Lucas, assessing him with practiced eyes. "And you are?" "Dr. Lucas Blackwood, Emergency Medicine, St. Matthew's Hospital in Helena." He reached for his hospital ID, which he'd shown Rebecca days earlier, and presented it. "I was delivering medications to the Pine Tree Clinic when the storm forced me off the road. Miss Sullivan allowed me to shelter here, which was fortunate as I was able to provide medical care when her infant son developed a minor infection." The deputy seemed satisfied with this explanation, but Winters made notes on her clipboard. "And the child's current condition?" "Fully recovered," Lucas stated firmly. "Ms. Sullivan actually assisted in his treatment using her background in pharmaceutical compounding. I see." Winters turned back to Rebecca. "Ms. Sullivan, given the ongoing weather concerns and your isolated location, we would like to recommend temporary relocation to town until road conditions improve permanently. The Red Cross has established a shelter at the Pine Tree Community Center with appropriate facilities for families with young children." Rebecca straightened, her expression resolute. "While I appreciate the concern, my children are thriving here. We have adequate supplies, heat, and professional medical supervision. I don't see any reason to disrupt them further by moving to a shelter." An uncomfortable silence followed as Winters seemed to consider pushing the issue. The deputy, perhaps, sensing the rising tension, intervened. "Main roads should be fully cleared by tomorrow," he offered. "But we're expecting another system to move through the day after. Nothing like what we just had, but potentially another foot of snow." "We're prepared for that," Rebecca assured them. "Dr. Blackwood has helped ensure we have everything we need." Winters looked like she wanted to object further, but ultimately nodded. "I'll note that you've declined relocation assistance at this time. However, I'd like to schedule a follow-up visit once road conditions have fully stabilized." The implication was clear. This wasn't over. Even after they returned to normal conditions, Rebecca would face scrutiny over her parenting decisions and living situation. After the officials departed, Rebecca sank onto the couch, her composure finally breaking. "They think I'm an unfit mother," she whispered, voice cracking, "that I endangered my children by staying here. Lucas sat beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "They're following protocol after an emergency, nothing more." "It's more than that," Rebecca argued. "Marshall must have said something about you being here. A man they don't know staying with a widow and her children, and now they're watching. Me, evaluating whether I should keep my kids." "That's not going to happen," Lucas stated firmly. "Your children are healthy, well cared for, and clearly thriving despite incredibly difficult circumstances. Any objective evaluation would recognize your exceptional parenting." Rebecca shook her head, unconvinced. "You don't understand how these systems work. Once you're flagged for concern, everything comes under scrutiny. Our isolated location, my limited income, the lack of nearby support systems since Daniel died." The fear in her voice was palpable and legitimate. Lucas had seen similar situations during his work with reservation families, where cultural differences and poverty were often misinterpreted as neglect. "Then we address those concerns systematically," he said, his mind already forming a plan, "starting with ensuring you have reliable support and access to resources." "How?" Lucas took her hand, his decision crystallizing in that moment. "By creating the support network you need. Professional, medical, and personal." The meaning behind his words hung in the air between them. A commitment beyond their current crisis, a promise to remain connected in whatever capacity she would allow. Outside, the temperature dropped as night deepened, stars appearing in brilliant clarity above the snow-covered landscape. Inside, two people from vastly different backgrounds faced a crossroads neither had anticipated. Their futures suddenly, unexpectedly intertwined by forces beyond their control. The question now was whether they would embrace that connection. Once the immediate crisis passed and the real world, with all its judgments and obstacles, reasserted itself around them. Morning arrived with fresh challenges. The brief respite in weather had ended, and though not as severe as the initial blizzard, snow was falling steadily again. Rebecca stood at the window, watching large flakes swirl down from a steel-grey sky, while Lucas checked the radio for updates. "Highway. Patrol reports the main road to Helena is possible with chains," he informed her. "The hospital has sent a vehicle to retrieve me. They should reach the turnoff to your property by noon." Rebecca felt her stomach tighten at this announcement. Despite the rational understanding that their forced cohabitation would eventually end, the prospect of Lucas leaving created an unexpected hollow sensation in her chest. "That's good news," she managed, keeping her voice steady for Lily's benefit. The little girl was watching them both with solemn eyes, clearly sensing the shift in their dynamics. "Are you going away today?" Lily asked Lucas directly. He knelt. To her level, his expression gentle but honest. "I need to get back to the hospital, Lily. There are other people who need my help, just like you and your mom and Michael did." Lily's lower lip trembled slightly. "But who will help us if another storm monster comes?" The innocent question cut through the adult pretense of casual separation. Rebecca found herself unable to answer, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't express. Lucas glanced up at Rebecca before responding to Lily. "I won't be far away, and I promise I'll come back to check on you if your mum says that's okay." Rebecca nodded mutely, unwilling to trust her voice. The 5 days they had spent together in crisis had created a bond that defied conventional timelines, a connection forged in shared survival and mutual discovery. "We should prepare for your departure," she said finally, focusing on practicalities. "You'll need provisions for the journey, and I should write down Michael's treatment details for the pediatrician in town." The next few hours passed in busy preparation. Lucas organized his medical supplies, leaving Rebecca with certain essentials: antibiotics, fever reducers, and some of his grandfather's herbal remedies, carefully labeled with usage instructions. Rebecca packed a small bag of food for his journey and wrote detailed notes about Michael's condition and the compound she had created to treat his infection. As noon approached, Lucas stepped outside to check conditions. The new snowfall had accumulated several inches already, but the path he'd cleared remained passable. In the distance, the red blanket signal flag fluttered against the white landscape, a beacon to the approaching hospital vehicle. When he returned inside, his expression was serious. "We need to talk before they arrive." Rebecca braced herself, uncertain what was coming. She had deliberately avoided any conversation about what might happen after their forced proximity ended, fearful of presuming too much about his interest in maintaining a connection to her family. "Last night, I promised to help create a support network for you and your children," Lucas began, his voice low as Lily played with Michael on a blanket nearby. "I meant that, but I need to know if it's what you want." "What exactly are you offering?" Rebecca asked cautiously. Lucas held her gaze steadily. "Professional support, certainly. I've already spoken with the hospital administration about the rural outreach program. They're eager to implement it, especially with the evidence of need this storm has provided." "And you think I could be part of that program?" "I know you could," he said with conviction. "Your compounding skills, combined with your unique diagnostic abilities, would be invaluable for patients in isolated communities. You could start part-time while the children are young, perhaps with a lab space in Pine Tree." The vision he painted was tempting, a way to reclaim her professional identity while maintaining her life in Montana. Yet Rebecca sensed there was more he wasn't saying. "And beyond the professional?" she prompted quietly. Lucas took a deep breath. "I'd like to continue knowing you, Rebecca, not just as colleagues or friends forged in crisis." His expression remained steady, but vulnerability showed in his eyes. "What we've discovered here, this connection between us, I believe it's worth exploring." The directness of his admission momentarily robbed Rebecca of response. In the days since Daniel's death, she had functioned in survival mode, focused solely on her children's needs. The possibility of personal happiness, of connection with someone who saw and valued her complete self, had seemed impossibly remote. "It's too soon," she whispered finally. "Daniel's only been gone 2 months. I'm still grieving. The children—" "I understand," Lucas said gently. "I'm not asking for immediate answers or commitments, just openness to possibilities." Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. Through the window, they could see a hospital SUV with chains on its tires navigating the snowy path to the cabin. The moment for further discussion had passed. Reality had arrived in the form of Lucas's colleagues, come to return him to his normal life. Rebecca felt a surge of panic. So much remained unsaid between them. "They're here," she said unnecessarily, turning away to compose herself. Lucas touched her arm lightly. "This isn't an ending, Rebecca. Not unless you want it to be." The arrival of the hospital vehicle brought not only Lucas's colleagues, but also supplies for the Sullivan family. Groceries, medications, diapers, and fuel for the generator. Dr. Eleanor Wright, the hospital's outreach coordinator, greeted Rebecca warmly while assessing the situation with professional eyes. "Dr. Blackwood radioed that you'd been treating an infant with an innovative compound," she said while helping unload supplies. "I'd be interested in your documentation if you're willing to share it." Rebecca glanced at Lucas, who nodded encouragingly. "I've kept detailed notes," she confirmed. "It's an adaptation of a traditional Comanche remedy, modified for pediatric use." Dr. Wright's interest appeared genuine. "That's exactly the kind of integrative approach we've been discussing for our rural outreach program. Would you consider consulting with us once you're able to come to Helena?" The offer, though preliminary, represented validation of Rebecca's abilities from the medical establishment that had previously dismissed her work. She felt a surge of gratitude toward Lucas, knowing he had paved the way for this opportunity. "I'd be very interested," she replied carefully, though my childcare situation limits my mobility currently. We're developing options for that too, Dr. Wright assured her. Many of our rural healthcare providers are parents of young children. We're exploring cooperative childcare arrangements as part of the program's structure. As the conversation continued, Rebecca realized Lucas had done more than merely suggest her involvement. He had actively advocated for her inclusion and for accommodations that would make her participation possible. The moment of departure arrived too quickly. Lucas's colleagues were anxious to return to Helena before the snowfall intensified further. Final goodbyes were exchanged, contact information shared, and promises made for follow-up communications. When Lucas knelt to say goodbye to Lily, the little girl threw her arms around his neck with unexpected ferocity. "You promise you'll come back," she demanded. "I promise," he assured her solemnly, "and Comanche people never break their promises." His goodbye to Rebecca was necessarily more restrained given their audience, but his eyes conveyed what words could not. "I'll call once I reach the hospital," he said simply. "We'll continue our conversation." Then he was gone, the hospital vehicle, disappearing down the snowy path, leaving Rebecca and her children alone in the cabin once more. The silence felt oppressive after days of shared conversation and purpose. Lily's small voice broke the stillness. "Mommy, is Dr. Lucas going to be a part of our family now?" The innocent question crystallized the choice before Rebecca. She could retreat into the safety of grief and isolation, or she could step forward into an uncertain but potentially rich future. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," she answered honestly. "But I think we might be at the beginning of something new." For some, following weeks brought rapid changes to the Sullivan family. With the roads finally cleared, Rebecca was able to take Michael for a proper medical examination in Pine Tree. The local doctor confirmed Lucas's diagnosis and expressed admiration for the treatment approach, requesting Rebecca's notes for his records. News of her innovative remedy spread quickly through the small medical community. Dr. Wright from Helena called twice, each conversation more specific about potential roles for Rebecca in the developing rural healthcare initiative. The CPS investigation concluded with a positive report, acknowledging that Rebecca had made appropriate decisions during the crisis and had ensured proper care for her children throughout. The caseworker did, however, recommend establishing stronger community connections to prevent future isolation. 2 weeks after leaving the cabin, Lucas returned as promised. His arrival on a Saturday morning bearing books for Lily and a small pharmacy toolkit for Rebecca felt simultaneously momentous and natural, as though the rhythms of their brief shared life had merely paused rather than ended. The hospital board approved the rural outreach program, he announced over coffee at Rebecca's kitchen table. Full funding for a 3-year pilot with mobile clinics serving Pine Tree and 5 other communities within a 100-mile radius. "That's wonderful," Rebecca said sincerely. "When does it launch?" "April. If all goes according to schedule, they've offered me the position of medical director." His eyes met hers across the table. "And they're very interested in your involvement, particularly in developing customized treatment protocols for patients with limited access to conventional pharmaceuticals." The opportunity represented everything Rebecca had once hoped for professionally. The chance to apply her unique abilities in meaningful ways, bridging traditional and modern approaches to healing. "I've been thinking about it constantly," she admitted. "It feels right professionally, but I'm concerned about practical logistics. This property is too remote for daily commuting to Pine Tree, especially with the children." Lucas nodded, understanding. "I've been considering that too. There's a small house available on the edge of Pine Tree, close to the clinic, but with enough yard for the children to play. The owner is willing to rent with an option to buy." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "You've been busy "I told you I was serious about creating that support network," he replied simply. Their conversation was interrupted by Lily's excited entrance, her face lighting up at the sight of Lucas. "You came back," she exclaimed, climbing onto his lap, without hesitation. "I told Michael you would, but he didn't believe me because he's just a baby." Lucas laughed, settling the little girl comfortably. "I always keep my promises, remember, and I brought something special for you." He reached into his bag and produced a children's book about Comanche legends, beautifully illustrated with watercolor paintings. Lily's delight was palpable as she carefully opened the book. "Will you read it to me?" "Of course. But first, I need to finish talking with your mom about important grown-up things." Once Lily had been dispatched to look at her new book in the living room, Rebecca and Lucas resumed their conversation, moving beyond professional opportunities to more personal matters. "I've spoken with a grief counselor in Helena," Rebecca confided. "You were right about needing support through that process. I don't want my unresolved grief to affect the children or any new relationships in my life." The implication of her words hung between them, an acknowledgement of possibilities. "Daniel will always be part of your story," Lucas said gently. "The father of your children, your first love. Nothing changes that." "But life continues," Rebecca completed the thought, "and sometimes brings unexpected gifts from unlikely sources." Their eyes met with new understanding, neither rushing forward nor holding back, but acknowledging the path opening before them. Spring arrived in the Blackfoot Valley with dramatic suddenness. Snowmelt revealed green shoots pushing through muddy. Earth and birds returned to fill the morning air with song. The world renewed itself in the ancient cycle of rebirth after dormancy. Rebecca stood on the porch of the small blue house in Pine Tree, watching Lily chase butterflies in the front yard, while Michael practiced his new crawling skills on a blanket nearby. The move from the isolated cabin had been emotionally difficult, but practically liberating. Here, surrounded by a supportive community, her children were thriving and her own spirit was gradually healing. The Rural Healthcare Initiative had launched successfully, with Rebecca working 3 days a week in a specialized compounding lab attached to the Pine Tree Clinic. Her unique formulations, combining traditional remedies with modern pharmaceutical principles, had gained recognition throughout the region. Patients with complex needs or medication sensitivities were specifically referred to her, some traveling considerable distances to benefit from her expertise. Lucas divided his time between the hospital in Helena and the rural clinics, typically spending 3 days each week in Pine Tree. His temporary accommodations at the local boarding house had become a running joke between them, neither rushing the evolution of their relationship, but both recognizing its inevitable direction. "Careful near the road, Lily," Rebecca called as a familiar vehicle approached their driveway. Her daughter waved excitedly as Lucas parked and emerged, carrying what appeared to be seedlings in small pots. "Planting day as promised," he announced, setting the plants on the porch steps. "Medicinal herbs for your garden, golden seal, echinacea, white oak seedlings, and your favorite blue cohosh." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Rebecca deeply. These were not merely plants, but symbols of their shared journey, the healing, traditions that had saved her son, the knowledge that had brought them together, and the future they were carefully cultivating. "Perfect," she said, examining the healthy starts. "We'll plant them together." As they worked in the rich spring soil, Lily helping by asking endless questions and occasionally sprinkling water where directed, Rebecca felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The acute pain of Daniel's loss had gradually transformed into a gentle ache, always present but no longer debilitating. "The hospital board was impressed with your treatment protocols," Lucas mentioned as they worked. "They're discussing implementing them throughout the regional system." Rebecca smiled at this validation, Dr. Wright mentioned they're receiving inquiries from other rural healthcare programs about our integrative approach. Our approach, Lucas repeated, emphasizing the partnership. Their work had become. That's what makes it special, the combination of perspectives, not just mine or yours alone. The same could be said for their personal relationship, Rebecca reflected. Neither attempting to change the other, but each enriching the other's understanding of the world. Later, as afternoon faded toward evening, they sat on the porch swing watching the children play. Michael had fallen asleep on a blanket, his peaceful features so like Daniel's that Rebecca felt the familiar, bittersweet recognition. "The Comanche have a saying," Lucas remarked, following her gaze. "The spirit of those we've loved remains in the faces of their children and in the hearts of those who remember them." Rebecca leaned slightly against his shoulder, allowing herself to accept the comfort he offered. "I think Daniel would approve of where we've landed," she said softly. "Not just because of you, but because the children are happy and I'm using my abilities to help others again." Lucas's arm settled gently around her shoulders, the gesture now familiar and welcome. "Your hidden talent wasn't so much your pharmaceutical skill or your diagnostic intuition," he observed. "It was your capacity for resilience, the ability to rebuild from tragedy and find new purpose." With considerable help, Rebecca acknowledged, thinking of how close she had come to losing everything in that isolated cabin during the storm. "The strongest people know when to accept help," Lucas replied. "My grandfather taught me that true healing is rarely a solitary journey." As twilight deepened over the Blackfoot Valley, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold, Rebecca Sullivan contemplated the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. From a desperate widow facing death in a blizzard to a respected healer building a new life, the journey had been neither direct nor easy. Yet here she sat, her children safe, her professional gifts recognized, her heart gradually opening to new possibilities. The man beside her, neither savior nor solution, but partner and possibility, represented a future she could not have imagined during those darkest days. "Lily wants us to plant strawberries tomorrow," Lucas mentioned, his voice warm with affection, for the little girl who had claimed a special place in his heart. "Strawberries in a medicinal garden?" Rebecca questioned with mock seriousness. "Why not? Medicine comes in many forms. Sometimes it's an herbal compound, sometimes it's a conventional, pharmaceutical." He smiled down at her. "And sometimes it's simply the sweetness of everyday joy." Rebecca returned his smile, accepting the wisdom in his words. Their story had begun in crisis and near tragedy, but it would continue in healing and hope, not just for themselves, but for the community they now served together. As stars appeared in the deepening sky, Rebecca felt a profound sense of gratitude for the storm that had nearly taken everything, but had ultimately delivered an unexpected gift. The discovery of her own strength, the revival of her unique talents, and the beginning of a love born in the crucible of survival, but flourishing in the fertile ground of shared purpose and mutual respect. The widowed mother left to die in a winter storm had not merely survived, she had been transformed, emerging stronger and wiser, ready to embrace whatever challenges and joys awaited on the path ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.